The void did not open like a wound tonight, it opened like a bell, tolling across the Immaterium. Its note so pure it shattered choir lofts of astropaths from the halo stars to the maelstrom. On Gethsemane Secundus, a hive planet whose spires rose like cathedral spears through a sky, the color of old bruises, the warning came as a shiver through every shrine censer and a flicker in every lumen. Voxnets spat garble, orbital augers lost their lock, and for one breathless second, even the great macro batteries of the defense ring forgot their names. Then the heavens burned. A body fell through atmosphere trailing fire, but it did not tumble as debris. It chose each angle, shaved heat from shock fronts with the arrogance of a god, and bled no ablative sheathing because it needed none. On the governor's balcony, administratum robes flapping like carrion birds, Lord Enoch Pale drew magnoculars to his eyes and found the shape at the heart of the comet, a man, or something that chose the shape of one broad-shouldered cloak like a banner of war, a glyph on his breast that was not the aquila and not any sigil a loyal subject should live long after seeing. Servo skulls recorded. Confessors muttered the litany against false signs. The Mechanicus delegation, 8 magi deep, chittered binary prayers and asked their augurs the same question 5 different ways and got the same heretical answer each time. No void thrusters, no grav impellers, no wings, no telekinetic bleed. Just will, applied like a law. He slowed above the highest spire and hovered where the wind had no right to carry a man, and when he spoke his voice ignored the miles and the glass and the storm and arrived in the bones of all who watched. "Your world is in danger," he said, and the words landed with the certainty of a verdict. "I am Kal-El, I'm here to help." The sky answered him. Not with thunder. Gethsemane's storms had long ago learned to be quiet in the presence of greater terrors, but with the hard, insectile churr of impossible geometry. Below the hive, beneath strata of dead manufactoria and ossuaries, tomb engines that had not known waking in 60 million years chose to remember their names. Green light stitched the bedrock. Phase echoes crawled up elevator shafts like frost. The first monolith translated into low atmosphere with the manners of a guillotine. Its shadow cut a cathedral in half and left the faithful on both sides continuing the same hymn with different fates. Scarabs poured like mercury. Gauss flensed statues down to memory. The defense ring engaged. Macro shells streaked like falling chapels. Las batteries stitched rosaries of light. Nothing mattered. Where green beams touched, matter became argument and then became nothing. In the command cathedral, choirmistress Electra screamed 3 words Tom World waking and bit through her own tongue to stop the warp from borrowing her voice. Inquisitor Isola Severine did not look away from the hololiths. She made the micro sign of contempt and said, "Lock every spire, seal pilgrim tears, and draw every real gun we have." On the hololith, the anomaly the man moved, not as aircraft move, not as Astartes jump pack's arc, but like a decision. He met the monolith in the sky and pushed. It should have been absurd. The weight was a cathedral of black equations, the inertia a sermon about inevitability. His hands set against obsidian that had never met equal, and his shoulders took the prayer of a world that wanted not to die, and then he changed the math. Air thundered, clouds tore like vellum. The monolith went up. A heartbeat later, 2 red spears of light lanced from his eyes. They did not splay, they did not scatter. They carved. A corner sheared. The geometry screamed like a choir burning. The tomb engine fell sideways with all the offended dignity of an executioner missing the neck. The scarabs swarmed him then, clever as famine and numberless as penitence. They crawled his cloak and found it only cloth. They found his skin and found it only invulnerable. They tried the trick that works on tanks and titans, removing a thing by remembering it was never there, and discovered he was stubborn in a way the universe itself respects. He blew, just breath, but focused like a lance. Hoarfrost raced across living metal and caught 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 machines in a single frozen sentence. His fists delivered the period. On the streets below, a hab block slumped as Gauss took its spine. He did not choose, he arrived. In a blur that insulted causality, he stood beneath 100,000 tons of falling domestic failure and refused to let it end as a statistic. He shouldered the building's grief and set it back on its feet, like a father setting a child down after a rough play. A statue of the emperor cracked at the waist and toppled. He caught the old stone and lifted it as if apologizing to a history that was already suspicious of him. On the balcony, Governor Pale whispered, "Saint," and then, with the shame of a man who knows better, or Daemon, Magos Calix 7's augmetic eye irised wide. "No warp signature," he said. "Every syllable a bead of oil. No Geller bleed, no measurable emission at all. Either a machine beyond measure or a lie," Inquisitor Severine finished, "because it is the duty of her kind to end every hope with a scalpel. Written edict. Anomalous entity will submit to catechism, scholar interrogatory, and triune examination by Ordo Xenos, Malleus, and Hereticus." She watched him cut a crescent from a second monolith and wondered what color his blood was. "If it bleeds," she said softly for herself alone, "it can be redeemed or it can be burned." The second translation pulse slammed reality like a hymnal dropped from orbit. Not Necron this time, this was human sin given engines. A pirate flotilla hoping to sip marrow from a dying world tore in at the edge of the defense ring and found a man already angry in the sky. He left the second monolith to gravity and arrived at the prow of a raider cruiser mid-broadside. Macro cannon shells the size of pilgrim chapels met his palms and became confetti and hot rain. He walked through a lance beam that erased vox prayers mid-amen and came out the other side half bored with it. He blew again breath cold as old winter, a starless kind, and iced the prow down to its malice. One nudge, like a disapproving parent, and the cruiser's path no longer intersected the hive. The defense ring found its courage in the wake he left and began to act like a weapon again. He came down then not to the governor's balcony, to the Cathedral of St. Uctor where the roof was gone and the faithful sang louder to pretend it mattered. He landed like a promise. Wind he hadn't earned whipped banners he hadn't sworn to. He looked wrong in this place, too bright, too clean, too fast at forgiving gravity, and when he spoke inside the ruin, the old stones decided to carry his voice because sound likes to be carried. "Evacuate the lower sluices," he told a confessor whose hands were black with someone else's blood. "There's a fault line there. It's cracking." The confessor blinked. I can hear it," he said, and that was the first sin he confessed to Gethsemane, that he could hear what no man should, that every heartbeat within a dozen kilometers sounded to him like a plea he was honor-bound to answer. "Children first," he added, as if the Imperium were the kind of place that sentence meant something uncomplicated. The inquisitorial gunship broke the clouds like a black thought. It hovered above shattered saints and lowered a boarding ramp with all the warmth of a writ of execution. Rosarius sigils burned. Bolters found their reasons. An interrogator with a voice that made her name Mercy sound like sarcasm raised a vox-amplified hand. "By authority of the Holy Ordos," she said, "the anomaly will submit." He turned. The red in his gaze dimmed into the weary blue of a man who has explained himself too many times in too many worlds. He did not kneel. "People are dying," he said simply, and when Mercy opened her mouth to reply with doctrine, he was already gone. A blue streak through a gap in the world, his absence tugging at robes and arguments. In the command cathedral, hololiths chased him and lost him, and found him again clearing a hospital tier with the efficiency of an army and the care of a mother, then slamming upward into the path of a third translation spike, where a night scythe decided to introduce an entire platoon of flayers to the concept of ownership. He met the scythe head-on and taught it humility. On the balcony, Governor Pale lowered his magnoculars with hands that had seen too many taxes and not enough miracles. "What do we call him?" he asked, not to anyone who could answer, but because humans have to name the things that scare them less. Magos Calix 7's mechadendrites curled as if in prayer. "Anomaly," he said. "Machine," he said. "Heresy," supplied the confessor with the speed of reflex. The Inquisitor watched the symbol on the stranger's chest and found in it nothing she could file. "We call him a problem," she said at last, "and we survive the hour he buys us." The third monolith began to cut the hive cleanly in two. He caught its shadow from half a world away and arrived before its edge finished, choosing the street. Hands again, shoulders again. He set his feet on ferrocrete that remembered earthquakes and made it remember mercy. Somewhere in the underhive a child coughed in a room with no windows, and he heard it. And he hated this place for making that matter less than a monolith. He lifted. The sky cracked. The green geometry screamed a hymn in a language that had never included the word no, and learned it, and fell. In that moment, precisely then, while a planet watched a man refuse the script written for it, the first rumor was born. It left a pilgrim's mouth and took wings on 1,000 terrified tongues, not Primarch, not Daemon, not Saint something older. A word outlawed by practicality. A word the Imperium had burned from itself, and still found hidden under bedboards and in children's games. Hope. Inquisitor Severine drew breath to crush it with doctrine, and tasted ash because she knew better than any what hope does to orderly civilizations. She lifted her vox and said, very calmly, as the stranger rose again into a sky now crowded with enemies who had noticed they were being refused. All Ordos assets converge. The anomaly will not be allowed to choose our theology for us. Above her, he blurred toward the dark between stars, where more translation flares were budding like a disease. He did not look back. It would have been easier if he had. It is always easier to burn a man who stares at you. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He did not pray. For 3 days and 3 nights the being who called himself Kal-El fought across the surface of Gethsemane Secundus until even the storms grew tired of watching him. The Necron tomb legions had come in waves like nightmares given clockwork bones. They rebuilt what he broke, remembered what he forgot to destroy, adapted like logic until logic itself bent beneath his refusal to die. He learned their patterns, the perfect mathematics of annihilation that guided every green pulse of their weapons, and he ruined it by not belonging. He was not written in the equations of their universe, and that made him heresy even to the machines. He crushed a Triarch stalker beneath one hand and ripped the spinal rod of a Necron overlord free in the other, its circuits hissing like incense burners dying at the altar. When they phased away, he did not chase. He stared up at the black hole sun above the hive world's smog and thought, if this place worships a god, then that god is very tired. Across the planet, millions of eyes watched through cracked vid feeds. Some believed they were seeing the Emperor incarnate. Others believed a daemon had taken his shape to test them, and some, the dangerous few, simply believed again. That belief terrified the Inquisition more than the Necrons ever could. Inquisitor Isola Severine watched the Man of Tomorrow from the Command Cathedral, every heartbeat of his, captured in shimmering green wireframe by Mechanicus augurs. The Magi spoke in static prayers as their readings continued to defy Imperial physics. No warp signature, no psychic residue, no heat loss consistent with metabolism. If it is a machine, one said, it is one that dreams. If it is a saint, said another, then our Emperor has found a cruel sense of irony. Severine did not speak. She stared at the symbol on his chest, an alien rune of power and mercy, and felt the old sickness of doubt crawl up her spine. The Ecclesiarchy called for his immediate canonization. The Mechanicus wanted to dissect him in the name of understanding. The Astra Militarum wanted to point him at every war they were losing. And the Inquisition, by reflex and doctrine, wanted him dead. She lit a low stick and watched him tear a Necron night scythe from the sky bare-handed, smoke curling from her lips like prayer. He bleeds, she said softly. That means he can die. Find a way. Beneath the ruined hives, far below the reach of light, the tombs did not sleep easily. Their king had noticed. Deep in the crust, beneath slabs of silent machinery the size of continents, a command node pulsed to life. A consciousness older than humanity stretched across the black rivers of its data tombs and saw the impossible. The enemy was not of the warp, not of flesh, not of the star gods. A variable it could not solve. Algorithms of genocide recalculated and returned error. Logic concluded the only solution was escalation. Above ground, the sky dimmed as monoliths multiplied. Each one bled green radiance over the hive cities until the shadows themselves screamed. Kal-El rose again, faster than thought, and met the first of them before it could align its particle flayers. The impact cracked atmosphere. Plasma spilled like rain. He tore through it as if anger alone were a weapon, and it almost was. But even he had limits, and the Necrons were endless. Each destroyed phalanx rose anew from the ash. Each shattered hull rebuilt itself from memory. For every 1,000 he broke, 1,000,000 waited in stasis. He heard every death. He saw every scream. His mind stretched thin between mercy and futility until his fists became sermons on why surrender was still a sin. On the second day, the Imperial Navy arrived. 5 battle barges, a dozen cruisers, and a fleet of escort frigates. Their arrival split the clouds with hymns broadcast at a frequency meant to shame the warp itself. They saw him fighting alone in the storm and hailed him as an angel. The flagship Vox crackled with the voice of Admiral Lothair, a man too scarred to still believe in miracles, but too loyal not to recognize one when it bled for him. "Unknown combatant," he said, his voice shaking the Vox towers. "By authority of the Emperor, you fight in his name." Kal-El paused mid-air, blood and lightning on his face, and answered, "I fight for life." The Admiral smiled the way dying men do when the joke finally makes sense, and ordered his guns to join the song. The battle became a kind of apocalypse the universe had never seen before. Macro shells screamed prayers. Gauss fire cut reality into thin slices. Kal-El moved through it all like a ghost of intention, redirecting barrages, intercepting bombardments, punching asteroids into defensive trajectories. When the lead monolith began to overheat, he dived straight into its heart, past walls of green light that wanted to rewrite him. He reached its core, a crystalline mind that burned with the will of a dead god, and placed both hands upon it. "Rest," he whispered, and for a moment, it did. The entire Necron armada froze in unison, caught between command and confusion. It lasted only a breath, but in that breath, the Navy's broadside tore the sky apart. The monoliths fell like broken icons. When it was done, Gethsemane Secundus was a wasteland of glass and ash and half-remembered glory. Kal-El descended through the smoke, his cape torn, his body bruised and burning. Civilians crawled from the wreckage to see him land. Children reached out to touch his shadow. He smiled, the smallest act of rebellion left to him, before collapsing onto his knees. He had pushed his limits beyond divinity and found that even gods have to breathe. That was when the Inquisition struck. Dropships blacker than judgment rained from orbit. Hundreds of stormtroopers poured out, flanked by Adeptus Arbites and robed assassins whose faces were hidden by mirrored masks. At their center strode Inquisitor Severine, her gold-edged bolt pistol drawn, her rosette burning in the firelight. She looked at him like one looks at a relic that might explode. "Kal-El of Nowhere," she said, her voice amplified for the entire world to hear. "By decree of the Holy Inquisition, you stand accused of heresy, xenos impurity, and unsanctioned intervention in the affairs of mankind." He was still kneeling, exhausted, barely keeping his hands from trembling. "I saved your people," he said, his voice low but steady. "That is not a crime." "Everything unlicensed is a crime," she replied. "Even miracles," she signaled her guard. Bolters leveled. He looked at them, not in fear but disappointment. "You could have asked," he said. The first bolt round hit him in the chest and detonated. Smoke, fire, a shockwave that leveled the nearest ruins. When the dust cleared, he was standing. The armor-piercing shell had torn his cape to ribbons but left his body unbroken. "Please," he said softly. "Don't make me." They did. The next volley was answered by light. He moved faster than their hate, disarmed them with hands that refused to kill. He melted gun barrels with his eyes and hurled armored men aside like debris, never enough to end them, only enough to stop them. He reached Severine in 3 heartbeats. She aimed for his head. He took the pistol from her hand without touching her skin and crushed it until the metal wept. "I will not fight you," he said, and there was sorrow in it that made her wish he had just killed her. "You already are," she said. "Your existence is defiance." Above them, orbit burned. New warp signatures blinked into reality, chaos raiders drawn by the slaughter, by the screams of dying faith. The sky became veins of fire. Kal-El looked up and felt it again, that curse of endless duty. He turned away from her, from the soldiers, from the accusations, and rose into the void. "You cannot keep saving them," Severine shouted after him, her voice lost in the thunder. "They will burn you for it." He didn't answer. He was already gone, cutting through the atmosphere toward the new war, the crimson banners of chaos unfolding like wings across the stars. Inside his mind, exhaustion and hope warred, and neither won. He told himself there was still a chance that saving lives would be enough to change this empire. He told himself lies because he needed them. And behind him, on the ruined surface of Gethsemane Secundus, the people whispered a word that frightened the Inquisition more than any Xenos fleet could. Savior. The void around Gethsemane Secundus twisted like something alive as Kal-El entered it. He broke through the atmosphere as a line of red fire that divided the sky, his body trailing vapor and smoke as his cape burned away into nothingness. In the blackness above the world, the truth of what waited for him was revealed. The Chaos Fleet was not a fleet in any rational sense. It was an infection, a wound in the stars. Ships grown from metal and sin, hulls that bled light, engines that screamed sermons to gods older than morality. The lead vessel, a desecrated battleship known as Epitaph of Glory, carried a mark that burned like fever into the eyes of any mortal who saw it. The symbol of Khorne, god of blood and war, carved across its spine in a language made of screams. The vox frequencies that escaped its hull were not signals but prayers. The Chaos Marines aboard sang their master's name in voices that had forgotten language and now only knew hunger. Kal-El flew straight into that ocean of madness. The first barrage met him with the arrogance of gods. Macro shells and warp lightning rained from every direction. He moved faster than light could remember him, weaving through storms of metal and fire, deflecting some with his fists, ignoring others entirely. Each impact was a sun collapsing. He reached the prow of the first cruiser and tore it apart with his bare hands. The ship screamed as it died, its machine spirit begging for forgiveness that would never come. He could feel it in his bones, the wrongness of the warp, the screaming beneath reality. His Kryptonian physiology resisted it, but resistance was not immunity. The whispers came all the same. They came from inside the radiation of stars, from the memories of dead worlds, from the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. You could rule them all. The voice was not male or female, but every sound of worship ever spoken. You could bring peace. You could be the emperor they deserve. He gritted his teeth and kept fighting. He would not listen. He had learned long ago that the greatest temptations come dressed as virtue. Another ship turned toward him, bristling with cannons. He tore through it before it could fire, ripping its warp core from its housing and hurling it into the next vessel. The explosion turned space into a wound of gold and red. For a moment, everything was quiet. In that silence, something larger moved. From behind the Chaos Fleet, a warship emerged unlike any he had ever seen. It was not built, it was born. Its shape was inconsistent, shifting with each second, as if reality itself was struggling to decide what it was looking at. Voices leaked from it, singing praises to Khorne, a choir of billions whispering in unity. At its center stood a single figure, vast and terrible, armored in brass and bone. Vorgarth the Bloodbringer, Chaos Lord of the Epitaph, survivor of 1,000 crusades. The last time Kal-El had fought him, Vorgarth had worn Terminator armor and carried a daemon axe. Now he had changed. His body was fused with his ship, veins of steel pumping warp fire through his limbs, his mouth a furnace of screaming souls. He looked at Kal-El through the void and smiled. "The false god's pet returns," Vorgarth said, his voice carried across the vacuum by the will of his master. "You think yourself pure. You think your blood cannot be spilled. But you bleed already, Kryptonian. The warp has tasted you." Kal-El felt the wound in his chest flare again, the old cut from the daemon axe that refused to heal. It pulsed with a rhythm that was not his own. He ignored it. "You slaughter for meaning," he said. "I fight for life." Vorgath laughed, the sound shaking stars. Then die for it. He raised his arm, and the corrupted ship itself obeyed. From its hull, hundreds of drop pods launched in unison, each carrying Chaos Marines warped beyond recognition. Kal-El saw the pattern before it formed. He intercepted the first pods mid-flight, crushing them like insects. But there were too many. They rained upon Gethsemane's surface, turning craters into altars, blood into scripture. He turned to follow, but Vorgath struck. A beam of warp energy, bright as hellfire, hit him full in the chest and hurled him through a burning wreck. His body smashed through layers of hull until he emerged on the other side, coughing, his flesh scorched. Vorgath followed, ripping free from the cables that bound him to his ship, launching himself through the void with a roar that made the stars flicker. His armor boiled with molten brass, his eyes nothing but twin holes where reality leaked. The two collided like the meeting of suns. Every impact between them shattered kilometers of space. Vorgath's axe, reforged from the essence of the daemon Kal-El had once destroyed, struck his shoulder, cutting deep. Blood scattered into the void in perfect crimson orbs. Kal-El's fist slammed into the Chaos Lord's face, breaking teeth forged from souls. Vorgath swung again, faster, harder, powered by every death happening below. The warp itself answered his rage, feeding him strength. "You cannot fight eternity," Vorgath screamed. "Every drop of blood you spill becomes mine." Kal-El grabbed the axe mid-swing. His hands burned, the metal hissed and screamed, the daemon within it laughing in his mind. "I don't care," he said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "You've had this galaxy long enough." He tore the weapon from Vorgath's grip and turned it on him. The blade, once loyal to chaos, met its master and drank his soul in silence. Vorgath's body convulsed, the armor splitting, light pouring from every crack. Cornwill was all he managed before the explosion consumed him. When it ended, nothing remained but fragments of armor drifting through space. The axe was gone, turned to ash in Kal-El's hands. His wound still bled black. He looked down at the planet. The Chaos Marines had landed in the hive ruins. Even now, they slaughtered the survivors he had saved. Every heartbeat he heard below was another life lost. He fell through the void like a meteor and hit the surface so hard the ground liquefied. He stood in the midst of fire and ash, surrounded by the howling warriors of chaos. Their eyes were hollow pits filled with worship. Their chants shook the air. Blood for the blood god. The words were a plague that infected sound itself. He waded into them. Fists cracked ceramite. Bones broke. Bolter shells burst against his chest and vanished in steam. He fought without pause, his movements a blur of desperation and fury. They called him heretic, godling, abomination. He answered with silence. When the last one fell, he stood alone among burning spires, his body trembling. The sky above him glowed with unnatural red light, as if the warp itself was watching. "Is that enough for you?" he shouted to the heavens. "How much blood until you're satisfied?" There was no answer, only the hum of the warp and the sound of distant hymns echoing from orbit. He fell to his knees. The wound in his chest pulsed again, this time spreading veins of darkness across his skin. He could feel it now, the corruption creeping inward. He could hear the whisper again. "You could end all of this. You could rule. No more inquisition, no more tyranny, no more pain." He pressed his hand to the wound. "I will not become you," he said through gritted teeth. The ground cracked beneath him as if the planet itself disbelieved him. Above, the Inquisition's fleet circled like vultures. Inquisitor Severine watched through the viewport of her command ship. "He's falling apart," said Magos Calix 7. "The corruption is spreading beyond containment." Severine's jaw tightened. "Prepare containment fields. He must not die here." "He saved the planet," the Magos said. "He bought them another century. And that's what makes him dangerous," she answered. "Saints are harder to kill than monsters." She watched as he rose once more, his body wreathed in faint golden light that was not entirely his own. The corruption fought it, lashing across his veins like ink in water. For a moment, it seemed the galaxy held its breath. Then, without a word, He took off again, flying toward the black between stars, chasing an enemy that could never truly die. Behind him, the people began to rebuild the ruins, whispering prayers not to the Emperor but to the nameless savior who had defied both gods and monsters. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface, the surviving Necron tombs recorded his existence into their archives under a single entry: Anomaly 0x Quipton. Status: incomprehensible. Potential threat level: infinite. In the months that followed the Battle of Gethsemane Secundus, the name Kal-El spread through the Imperium like a virus that faith could not quarantine. In hive cities where light never touched, men whispered his name instead of the Emperor's during their final breaths. On Forge Worlds, adepts carved crude replicas of his symbol into scrap metal and hung them above workstations to ward off accidents. In frontier colonies long abandoned by the Administratum, preachers raised their hands to the stars and claimed a new savior had come, one who did not demand tithes of blood. To the Inquisition, this was blasphemy made flesh. To the Ecclesiarchy, it was worse than heresy. It was hope unlicensed by the High Lords of Terror. And yet, in the darkness of the galaxy, hope was a contagion impossible to burn clean. The Ordo Hereticus called emergency conclaves on hundreds of worlds. Governors were executed for failing to suppress the cult of the Kryptonian. Vox transmissions carrying his image were purged. Pilgrims were flayed for drawing his symbol in dust. But for every one silenced, 10 more began to speak. Across the Segmentum Solar, Inquisitor Isola Severine's name became tied to his. She had been the first to order his arrest, and the only one still alive who had seen him bleed. When the conclave summoned her to justify her failure, she stood before them in the black marble halls of the Tricorn Palace on Hydrapur. The gathered inquisitors sat like carrion birds in gilded cages, their eyes glinting with suspicion and fear. "You let it live," said Lord Inquisitor Marn, his voice echoing through the vaults. "You watched it destroy 2 enemies of mankind in a single night, and instead of claiming its corpse, you allowed it to escape." Severine met his gaze without flinching. "If I had ordered its death, every soldier on that field would have died for nothing. He saved a world the Imperium had already written off." "You speak of it as though it were a man," Marn hissed. "It is an aberration, a deviation from the Emperor's divine template. You of all people know what the Xenos do when they claim to save." "Then why?" she asked quietly. "Did it bleed red?" The hall fell silent. No one had an answer. The council adjourned with no verdict. Outside, beneath the blood-red sky, Severine lit a low stick and stared into the distance, wondering which frightened her more, the idea that Kal-El was a god or that he truly was a man. Beyond Hydrapur, far from the eyes of terror, Kal-El drifted between stars. He did not rest. He had no home to return to. Every system he passed whispered the same story in different dialects: war, plague, famine, despair. Humanity's empire stretched across the stars like a decaying colossus, held together by superstition and cruelty. He saw worlds where children were burned as sacrifices to a corpse that could not hear them, planets where entire populations were enslaved in the name of efficiency, soldiers who prayed for death but were denied even that mercy. He tried to intervene where he could. On the agri-world of Vestra, he stopped a rebellion when he discovered that both sides were starving. He repaired the planetary generator with his bare hands and carried water to those dying in the fields. On the mining moon of Vaughn, he broke open the Overseer's fortress and freed thousands of laborers, only to see the Imperial Guard arrive weeks later and massacre them for sedition. On the shrine world of Carthasia, he knelt beside a dying priest who still smiled as the fires consumed the temple. "Why do you smile?" Kal-El asked. "Because," the priest rasped, "if you exist, then maybe the Emperor forgives us." Those words haunted him through the void. Each act of kindness he performed twisted itself into tragedy. Every miracle became a weapon in someone else's doctrine. He saved a city, and it became a church. He saved a child, and they called him a prophet. He destroyed a daemon, and they crowned him a god. He wanted to be none of those things. He wanted only to help, but the Imperium did not understand help without hierarchy. In time, he found himself hunted again. A fleet of black ships, the Inquisition's soul prisons, tracked him across the Segmentum Obscurus. They carried Sisters of Silence and Psycho wards strong enough to snuff suns. They intended not to kill him but to contain him, to drag him before Terra itself for judgment. He did not fight them. He could have. Instead, when the ships cornered him above the storm world of Silas V, he surrendered. The Sisters bound him in chains made from psych-reactive adamantium. His power dimmed under their null fields. For the first time since his arrival in this reality, he felt mortal. They took him into the void, through corridors lined with icons of suppression, past the screams of imprisoned psychers, down into the heart of the flagship where the Inquisitor awaited. It was Severine. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She dismissed the guards and stood alone with him in the containment chamber. "Why?" she asked. "Why come willingly? You could have fled to the edge of the galaxy, and we'd never have found you." He looked at her, tired beyond expression. "Because running won't change what I've become. I carry something inside me that your weapons can't contain. The corruption. It grows." She hesitated, her hand brushing the hilt of her bolt pistol. "Then I should end you now." "If you were going to," he said, "you would have done it on Gethsemane." She exhaled, lowering her hand. "They will take you to Terra," she said, "to the Golden Throne itself. You will be judged by the Emperor." "Judged," he repeated softly. "Not saved?" "No one is saved," she answered. "Not even us." The journey through the warp was agony. Even within the Geller field, he could feel the eyes of the warp pressing against the ship. Daemons whispered through the cracks of his mind, promising power, absolution, freedom. He ignored them, but the wound in his chest pulsed brighter with every lie. By the time the ship reached Sol, his veins burned black under his skin, and his thoughts echoed with voices that were not his own. He could hear the hum of the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon, powered by the Emperor's will, like a heartbeat vibrating through the void. It was not light, it was suffering turned into direction. The ship descended into orbit above Terra, and for the first time, he saw the heart of the Imperium. It was not the shining capital of myth. It was a world drowned in smoke and stone, its oceans gone, its sky filled with the glow of orbital cathedrals and fortress stations. The entire planet was a shrine built around a corpse. The Sisters escorted him down through the layers of defense, through temples so vast they contained entire cities, past pilgrim processions that stretched for miles. Everywhere he looked, he saw devotion built on fear. They brought him before the Eternity Gate, where 10,000 custodies stood watch. The gate opened with a sound like a god breathing, and he was led into the throne room. The air was heavy, thick with psychic pressure that pressed against his lungs. At the center of the chamber, upon the golden throne, sat the Emperor of mankind, what was left of him. His body was desiccated, his face hidden beneath the lattice of machines that kept his essence alive. Yet even in that ruin of flesh, the power radiating from him dwarfed the stars. Kal-El fell to one knee, not in worship but because his body could not stand under the weight of that presence. The Emperor's eyes were fire without color. His voice was not heard but felt inside the bones of every living thing on Terra. "Last son of Krypton," the voice said, "why have you come to my realm?" Kal-El tried to speak, but his words dissolved into thought. "I came to help," he thought, "to save what I could. But everywhere I go, I only make things worse." "You are an intrusion," the Emperor replied, "a fragment from another design. You shine too brightly for a species that survives in shadow. Even now, your existence reshapes the faith of billions." Faith should be free, Kal-El thought. It should not be chained to fear. You speak of freedom as though it were life's natural state. It is not. Freedom breeds chaos. Chaos births gods. I have seen what becomes of worlds that worship freedom. The light from the throne dimmed, shadows stretching like scars. You have fought my enemies. You have saved my people. But your power is a temptation they cannot bear. Tell me, Kryptonian, what do you truly serve? Kal-El hesitated. I serve life. Then you serve me. "Whether you admit it or not," the Emperor replied. "For I am the only reason life endures in this galaxy. Without my light, there would be nothing but darkness." The words struck him like hammer blows. He wanted to argue, to deny, but he could feel the truth in them. The Emperor's will was the cage that kept chaos at bay. Without it, everything would collapse. "I can cleanse the corruption within you," the Emperor said. "But the choice will not be free. Every power carries a price. You must decide whether you wish to remain what you are, or become something greater and something less." Kal-El looked up at the withered god on the throne and saw not just divinity, but burden. 10,000 years of pain, a will that had never been allowed to rest. For the first time, he felt pity for the being all of humanity worshipped. "Do it," he said, "whatever it takes." The Emperor's light grew until it filled the chamber, until every thought and every shadow was burned away. In that light, Kal-El felt himself stripped bare. Every memory, every failure, every doubt laid open. The corruption screamed as it was torn from him, burning like a sun collapsing into itself. He fell into the light, his body convulsing as the Emperor's power remade him. For one endless moment, there was nothing but silence. Then he stood again. The wound was gone. His eyes burned with golden light. The symbol on his chest shimmered with new meaning, merged with the twin-headed Aquila. He felt the Emperor's will within him, not as control but as connection. "Rise," the voice said. "You are no longer alien. You are my shield against the darkness." Kal-El bowed his head. "And if I refuse?" "Then I will unmake you," said the Emperor, not in anger but in simple truth. Kal-El nodded once. "Then I will stand." Outside the throne room, the High Lords waited. When he emerged, clad in a new uniform of cobalt and crimson trimmed with gold, they fell to their knees. The decree spread across the Imperium within days. The Kryptonian anomaly was no more. In his place stood Sanctus Solaris, the Emperor's chosen protector. Some called him the Shield of Terror. Others called him the False Angel. But for those who had once whispered his old name in fear and love, he was still the same being who had fallen from the sky with nothing but conviction. He walked the halls of the Imperial Palace and looked toward the stars, where wars never ceased. He wondered if he had made the right choice, if the light he now carried was salvation, or just another kind of cage. In the grim darkness of the far future, hope had found a place to hide again, but even hope, he learned, can become a weapon when wielded by gods. The name Sanctus Solaris spread through the galaxy faster than any edict the Administratum could control. On some worlds, preachers called him the Emperor's living miracle. On others, whispers claimed he was a false god created by the Mechanicus to replace the Emperor's failing light. The truth was less divine and more tragic. Kal-El, now reforged by the will of the Golden Throne, existed between two realities. He was no longer Kryptonian and not quite human. He was a weapon baptized in faith and forged in contradiction. The Emperor's power ran through his veins like liquid gold, steady and unbearable, binding his will to a cause greater than himself. He had become an instrument of preservation, an angelic executioner tasked with enforcing the survival of mankind at any cost. His first mission came only days after his sanctification. Reports arrived from the Eastern Fringe. A splinter of Hive Fleet Leviathan had consumed 12 systems, and the Imperial Navy was losing ground. The Shield of Terror was dispatched alongside 3 Grey Knight strike cruisers and the 9th Order of the Adeptus Custodes. The Custodes viewed him with a silence that carried judgment heavier than words. They saw not a saint but an experiment, a living heresy the Emperor had chosen for reasons even they did not understand. When the fleet translated into the system of Myrath Prime, the scale of destruction was beyond anything Kal-El had ever known. The planet was already half digested, its atmosphere a soup of spore clouds and acidic rain. Tyrannid bioships blotted the stars. The void was a writhing ocean of flesh and chitin. The Navy's guns fired prayers of steel into the darkness, but against such hunger, prayer was meaningless. Kal-El stepped from the ship's airlock without armor, without weapons, surrounded by vacuum. He did not need air anymore. His body glowed faintly, suffused with the Emperor's power. He flew into the swarm, his heat vision cutting through the void like twin suns. Each beam carved tunnels through the endless wave of Xenos organisms. He moved faster than the Tyranids could react, punching through hive tendrils the size of cathedrals, ripping apart living ships, and using their burning carcasses as shields. The Grey Knights chanted liturgies over the Vox, invoking the Emperor's name as they watched him turn an entire swarm fleet into falling wreckage. But for every ship he destroyed, another emerged from the warp, birthed screaming from some unseen hive mind's dream. The Custodes wanted to retreat. Kal-El refused. "If we run," he said, his voice echoing through their comms, "we teach them that humanity's defenders tire before hunger does." He dived again, striking into the heart of the swarm where the hive ship pulsed with psychic energy. Its surface was a mountain of flesh, studded with bone towers and eyes that saw nothing but hate. He landed upon it, each footstep cracking carapace, and forced his hands into its surface. The creature screamed through the warp. Every Tyranid in the system turned toward him. The sky itself vibrated with their anger. He heard the voices of 1 billion minds through the hive network, an ocean of thought trying to drown him. They showed him visions of every world they had devoured, every species they had erased. He saw their perfection in consumption, their beauty in oblivion, and for a moment, he understood their god. It was not evil. It was inevitability. He closed his eyes and focused. The Emperor's light within him flared. Gold and blue radiance poured from his body, purifying the airless dark. He unleashed it all at once, a storm of pure energy that turned the hive ship into glass and silence. The psychic backlash shattered the swarm mind's coordination. Every lesser organism screamed in confusion and collapsed. The battle was over. Myrath Prime was dead, but humanity had survived one more day. When he returned to the fleet, the Custodes knelt. Even the Grey Knights bowed their heads. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt hollow. Every victory in this galaxy seemed to taste like defeat. The Emperor's voice reached him in dreams, subtle and distant. "You see now the burden of endurance." Kal-El did not answer. He did not pray. He only listened to the endless silence that came after war. Years passed, or what passed for years, in the warped measure of Imperial time. Sanctus Solaris became myth even before he died. He appeared on battlefields where the Imperium had already given up. He tore through the hulls of Orc cruisers and extinguished daemons with his bare hands. On the forge world of Helios, he stopped a planetquake by physically holding the tectonic plates apart until the Adeptus Mechanicus could stabilize them. On Cadia's ruins, he fought beside the Astra Militarum to cleanse the remnants of chaos cults, standing where even space marines feared to tread. But the more he served, the less he recognized himself. His mind began to fragment under the constant psychic strain of the Emperor's link. He no longer dreamed of Krypton. He no longer remembered the warmth of Earth's Sunday. His thoughts were becoming metallic, his compassion mechanical. Each time he hesitated to kill, the Emperor's will pressed harder through the connection, reminding him that mercy was not a luxury mankind could afford. One day, while stationed upon the fortress world of Solara, an order came from Terra itself. A planetary rebellion had broken out on Tarsus Ultima. Billions of Imperial citizens, driven by starvation and corruption, had risen against their rulers. The ecclesiarchy called it treason. The rebels called it desperation. Sanctus Solaris was commanded to suppress the uprising. When he arrived, the planet burned from pole to pole. Cities were in ruins. Imperial Guard regiments fought civilians in the streets. The rebels carried banners painted with his old symbol, the Kryptonian sigil, crude but unmistakable. They fought beneath the mark of hope. When he saw it, something broke in him. He descended into the capital, where the last of the loyalists were besieged. The rebels cheered when he landed, believing salvation had come. The loyalists knelt, believing judgment had arrived. He stood between them as their shells and prayers fell silent. "You kill each other for the same God," he said, voice heavy with grief. "Do you not see what you've become?" A rebel leader stepped forward, a woman with ash in her hair and defiance in her eyes. "We see it," she said. "That's why we fight. The Emperor demands everything and gives nothing. You stood against gods once. Stand with us now." "I cannot," he said. "I serve life." "Then you serve no one," she spat. "Because here life is the first thing they take from us." The loyalist commander stepped forward, face pale beneath his helm. "By the throne's decree," he said, "these people are heretics. Execute them." Kal-El closed his eyes. He could hear both sides praying to him, to the Emperor, to anyone who would listen. He thought of Krypton, of Earth, of every world that had died because men could not see each other as the same. He looked up at the burning sky. "No more," he said. The energy that left him was not rage, but sorrow made light. It spread across the battlefield in a wave of gold and white, disarming every weapon, melting every banner, silencing every war cry. When it ended, no one was dead, but no one could fight again. The Emperor's voice filled his mind like thunder. "You have defied my command." "I saved them," Kal-El thought. "You disobeyed. You made me to protect life, and I made you to obey." He felt the connection burn inside him. His body convulsed as the Emperor's will sought to reclaim what it had given. The light within him flickered, and for a heartbeat, he saw the full truth. The Imperium was not salvation, it was survival through control. The Emperor did not seek peace, he sought endurance, endless, brutal, necessary endurance. Kal-El rose to his knees, his armor cracked, his veins glowing with the struggle of two divine wills. "If this is your truth," he whispered, "then I cannot be your shield." He severed the link. The scream that followed tore through the warp. Custodies across the palace felt it and fell to their knees. The Astronomicon flickered for the briefest instant, then stabilized. On Tarsis Ultima, the people looked up and saw the golden light vanish from the sky. Kal-El was gone. Some said he burned away, consumed by the Emperor's wrath. Others said he fled into the void beyond the galaxy's edge. But the truth was more complicated. In the dark between stars, where neither light nor faith reached, he drifted. His power was diminished, his body scarred, but his will endured. He did not serve gods anymore. He served the faint idea that even in a universe built on despair, kindness could still exist. He watched the stars from the edge of reality and whispered a promise to the silence. "I will not let them forget what hope feels like." And across the galaxy, in the hearts of slaves and soldiers, a new whisper began to rise, quiet as prayer, steady as rebellion. It spoke not of the Emperor or chaos or any god, but of a man who refused to surrender his soul. It said that one day, when the stars were right, the one who fell from the heavens would return not as savior, not as conqueror, but as reminder. In a future where there was only war, someone had once believed that peace was worth dying for. He drifted beyond the reach of the Astronomicon, into the void where maps turned to myth. There, between the grave light of dying suns, Kal-El slept for the first time in centuries. His body floated among the bones of forgotten worlds, his heart beating faintly in the silence. The stars whispered around him, the echoes of lives long gone murmuring through the vacuum. The warp could not find him here, the Emperor could not touch him. For the first time since falling into this reality, he was truly alone. Time had no meaning, centuries or millennia may have passed. When he awoke, the universe had changed again. The Imperium's shadow had grown deeper, its cruelty refined by survival. Whole sectors had fallen to chaos and been reclaimed only to fall again. The Xenos empires had evolved, ancient races rising and burning out in endless cycles. Humanity endured, but it had forgotten why. On a derelict listening station orbiting a dead star, an astropath named Lyra received a signal. It was not warp static or encoded cipher, it was a heartbeat. Rhythmic, unnatural, human. She followed it through the silence and found the body of a man frozen in space, his blue uniform faded to gray, his chest marked with a symbol older than any record in the Mechanicus archives. She brought him aboard, not out of obedience but curiosity. The moment the air touched him, frost turned to steam, and his eyes opened. The light that filled the chamber was not the Emperor's, not warp, not science. It was life remembering itself. "Where am I?" he asked, voice soft but vast. Lyra fell to her knees, trembling. "The Imperium," she whispered. "Or what's left of it." He looked out through the viewport at a star field torn apart by warp storms. "It survived," he said. "Barely." She hesitated. "You should not be awake. They said the Kryptonian was gone. You're a myth." "Then let me remain one," he said. But the galaxy does not let myths rest. Word of his awakening spread faster than light could travel. Rogue traders, heretic captains, and loyalist admirals all sought him. Some wanted salvation, some wanted proof, and some wanted him dead before the Imperium learned he still existed. The Mechanicus claimed he was a living STC, a relic of pre-imperial perfection. The Ecclesiarchy declared him a blasphemy reborn, and the Inquisition, ever watchful, reactivated old archives buried beneath Terra's crust, the files labeled Anomaly 0x Krypton. Inquisitor Isola Severine's successor, Lord Inquisitor Heron Vale, read them in silence and made a single decision. If the Shield of Terra still lived, he must either be redeemed or erased. A crusade was declared. 1,000 ships, armed with faith and plasma, set course for the outer void. Kal-El, still weary of purpose, drifted through wreckage fields and dead systems. He saw the same pattern repeating through eternity. Mankind killing what it worshipped, worshipping what it feared. In the ruins of an ancient orbital cathedral, he found a group of refugees, humans, Eldar, and even an orc child, all hiding from the wars that devoured their species. They looked at him with equal awe and terror. One of them, an old preacher with mechanical lungs, spoke first. "If you are who they say you are, then why did you leave us?" Kal-El looked at his hands, scarred and glowing faintly beneath the skin. "Because I became what I swore to fight," he said, "and I didn't know how to stop." The preacher coughed, the sound metallic. "You can't stop what was never meant to end, but you can remind it that it began with mercy." Those words settled in him like seeds in ash. For the first time in ages, he smiled. He rebuilt the station's power core, fed its dying generators with his heat vision, and watched the lights return. The refugees sang a hymn without religion, just gratitude. It was small, but it mattered. Then the sky broke. The Inquisition arrived in force. Battle barges filled orbit, their prows engraved with burning scripture. From their hulls fell drop pods like iron rain. He watched from the cathedral's broken spire as the soldiers descended, and for a moment he considered fleeing again. But he was tired of running. When the first pod cracked open, he stood in the landing bay waiting. The inquisitorial stormtroopers raised their weapons. He did not move. Lord Inquisitor Vale descended behind them, clad in golden carapace armor inscribed with verses. "Sanctus Solaris," Vale said, voice magnified across the void. "By the authority of the Holy Ordos and the will of the Emperor, you are summoned to answer for your rebellion and your crimes against faith." Kal-El regarded him with calm eyes that still reflected sunlight, no longer born in this galaxy. "If the Emperor wills it, let him come himself." Vale's hand tightened on his power sword. "Blasphemy." "Truth," Kal-El said. "He saved me once. He made me his weapon, but he cannot rule a universe he does not walk within. Tell me, Inquisitor, how long has it been since anyone heard his voice?" Vale hesitated, his faith unsteady for just an instant. "The Emperor speaks through us." "No," Kal-El said, stepping closer. "He screams through you. Every prayer, every war, every child you sacrifice to keep this empire breathing, it is his agony echoing through time." Vale drew his sword. "Then we end that echo here." The battle that followed was not war. It was judgment. Plasma fire filled the air. Bolts screamed through the cathedral's shattered windows. Kal-El moved like gravity itself had chosen him. He caught shells in his hands, crushed blades before they reached him, and disarmed legions without killing a single soul. The Inquisitor struck at him, his sword humming with psychic force. It met Kal-El's palm and shattered into fragments of light. "You think you are mercy," Vale hissed, "but mercy is heresy." "Then heresy," Kal-El said quietly, "is all that keeps us human." He turned away from the fight, lifting the refugees into the air with a sweep of his power, carrying them beyond the burning station. The Inquisition's ships opened fire, the void blooming with explosions. Kal-El turned once, his eyes burning gold. "You will not harm them." His voice was not a threat but a law, and the shots curved aside, dissolving into stardust before they touched the fleeing station. The warp trembled as something old stirred within him. The Emperor's light, buried deep, still burned in fragments. For the first time, it did not command. It simply watched. The inquisitorial fleet broke formation. Some captains fired, some refused. The void filled with confusion, with fear, with awe. Kal-El looked down at the shattered station and the dying Inquisitor and said, "You cannot build eternity on obedience." Then he left them, flying beyond the rim of the galaxy, where even the Astronomicon could not follow. Behind him, rumors spread. Entire crusades faltered. Faith itself began to splinter. Some said the Shield of Terror had defied the Emperor and survived. Others said he had become the Emperor's unspoken will, acting where the Golden Throne could not. The truth became its own mythology. On worlds where the ecclesiarchy burned heretics, children drew his symbol in the dirt and prayed for the man who never stopped saving those who could not repay him. On planets swallowed by chaos, cultists whispered his name in fear, calling him the light that the warp could not consume. Among the shattered remains of dead civilizations, small groups of humans, xenos, and machines began working together, rebuilding quietly, guided by rumors of a traveler who had taught them how to live without worship. And somewhere beyond the galactic edge, Kal-El watched from a world without name, his hair streaked with silver, his face calm. He had learned to exist without victory. He had learned that saving one life mattered more than saving an empire. In his solitude, he remembered the words of his mother on a world long dead. "You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive toward." In this universe, the ideal was smaller, humbler, harder to keep alive, but it was still there. Every act of kindness, every refusal to hate, every moment of mercy was rebellion against the darkness. He no longer carried the Emperor's seal. He no longer bore the weight of divine command. He was simply Kal-El again, a man beneath a cruel sky, doing what he had always done. And as the galaxy turned, ancient and endless, even the warp seemed to hush, for it had learned one truth it could not unmake. Hope cannot die, it only waits. The stars had long since forgotten his name. In the endless rotation of galaxies and the slow decay of suns, Kal-El had become something like a rumor in the bones of time. Yet every rumor has a truth at its core, and the truth was this: he still lived. The universe had aged into cruelty so deep that mercy was spoken of as weakness. The Imperium had splintered into fragments of empire and faith, each calling itself righteous while drowning in the same old blood. The warp storms had thickened until even light itself forgot where it had been born. Chaos reigned not as conqueror but as nature itself. And still, in the black between, a single light moved. He had wandered far beyond the maps of men. There, he found the ruins of civilizations older than humanity, the bones of gods, and the echoes of wars that had broken creation long before the Imperium learned to lie about its eternity. He learned that time was a circle, and every empire was the same tragedy rehearsed by new actors. He saw worlds rise, promise redemption, and then repeat the same prayer with new names. He saw kindness die under banners of faith. He saw monsters born from love twisted into control. And through it all, he carried the same question in his chest. What does it mean to be good in a world that no longer remembers what good is? He had long stopped fighting wars. Battles no longer held meaning. There were no victories, only pauses between annihilations. Instead, he searched for moments. The faint laughter of a child on a colony barely surviving, the trembling hands of a medic saving one more life before the plague took her, the broken voice of a soldier singing an ancient hymn to no one but himself. These moments were his purpose now. He did not wear armor or titles. The symbol on his chest was faded, the colors muted, but when those who saw him looked closely, they still saw the glint of something older than despair. On one forgotten world, deep in the galactic void, a ship of scavengers crashed. They were a handful of humans, one Tau pilot, and a machine that had learned to call itself friend. The storm they fell through was thick with radiation, the kind that devoured life and memory. They had no faith left, no prayers worth saying. But as they dragged themselves from the wreckage, a figure stepped from the dust. Tall, silent, his eyes gentle. They pointed weapons out of reflex, but he only smiled. He helped them rebuild their ship. He lifted the broken hulls as if they were feathers and restored what had been lost. He asked for nothing. When they asked who he was, he only said, "A traveler." The Tau called him a saint. The humans called him hope. The machine called him impossible. When they left that world, the machine recorded his face, and the recording spread, carried in data fragments, merchant rumors, and broken Vox channels. Across dying stars and abandoned outposts, stories grew again. They said he walked among the lost and the damned, healing those who still believed in kindness. They said he was neither man nor God, but a reminder that once, before the galaxy drowned in its own faith, someone had tried to save without conquest. The Inquisition called it heresy reborn. The Ecclesiarchy called it temptation. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it anomaly. But among the common people, the story became something else. In the slave pits of Armageddon, mothers told their children that if they were brave enough to close their eyes and whisper his name, the pain would hurt a little less. On a mining world near the galactic edge, workers burned his symbol on the walls before each shift, believing it kept the tunnels from collapsing. In the cold monasteries of Terra, where the Emperor's priests prayed over machines that could no longer hear, the younger acolytes sometimes looked toward the stars and wondered if he still watched them. And perhaps, in that wondering, faith found a second life. One day, on a barren moon that had forgotten its parent world, Kal-El stood alone. The stars above were dim, eaten by the warp's haze. He could feel the universe thinning, the last lights flickering out one by one. Entropy was coming. Even gods would fade before it. He felt the exhaustion of eternity settle over him. He knelt upon the dust and let it fall through his fingers. This was the end of everything, and yet it felt strangely peaceful. He looked upward, toward the dark that had once been filled with promise, and whispered, "If there is any mercy left, let them rest. Let them know peace, even if it means I fade with them." The wind answered with silence, and then a faint warmth touched his face. A star, far away, flared one last time. He smiled. He thought of Krypton, of Earth, of the billions of souls he had failed and the few he had saved. He thought of the Emperor's golden light, of the children who drew his symbol in secret, of the people who had learned that compassion itself was rebellion. He thought of what it had meant to care when caring was forbidden, and for the first time since the day his ship crossed universes, he felt that maybe it had all been worth it. Somewhere beyond him, the warp quivered, sensing the pulse of his will, and recoiled. Hope, that ancient infection, was still alive. It burned faintly in the void, defying even the gods that fed on despair. The last of the great superhuman looked at the stars, and though his body was older than mountains and his soul tired beyond measure, his voice was steady. "The light survives," he said quietly. "It always survives." When the end finally came, no one witnessed it. There was no grand battle, no prophecy fulfilled, no monuments left to rot. Only a flicker in the dark, a heartbeat between galaxies, and then quiet. But in that quiet, the echo of him remained, imprinted into the fabric of existence. In the prayers of the lost, in the courage of those who chose mercy over fear, in the hands that built rather than burned, there was still the faintest glimmer of what he had stood for. And somewhere, Deep within the fading memory of creation, the universe itself whispered back, "Well done." The galaxies spun on, new stars born from the ashes of the old, carrying his light with them. They would not remember his name, they would not know his face, but in every act of kindness that defied extinction, he lived again. Hope was eternal because once, a man had proven it could be.